7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I always find it interesting that Republicans can preach about fiscal responsibility and then produce a budget that actually increases the deficit by $250 billion this year. And just think about it. You talk about how bad the deficits are, and then say, that's why I'm voting for the bill that increases the deficit. Reducing the deficit isn't that hard. Every Democratic president since Kennedy has been able to hand over to their Republican successors a better deficit situation than they inherited, everyone without exception, and every Republican preaching about fiscal responsibility has handed over to the Democrats a worse deficit situation than they inherited, without exception. Obama improved George W. Bush's deficit. Trump had a significant worse deficit than he inherited from Obama. President Biden has improved the deficit from what he got from President Trump, and here we are starting off with a budget that's going to make things worse. But then the insult to injury is that this budget asks for us to adopt extensions of trillions of dollars in tax cuts heavily tilted to the wealthy and corporations, and pay for those tax cuts with cuts in spending. But this amendment just asks that those cuts, tax cuts for the wealthy, not be paid for with cuts to programs within the jurisdiction of the Education and Workforce Committee. A lot has been said about the instructions are not specific. So when you said, oh, we're going to cut Medicaid, you say, oh, it's not Medicaid, you can cut something else, when whatever else there is either isn't there, isn't enough, or may actually be worse. But what are you going to cut within the jurisdiction of education and the workforce? You're asking for hundreds of billions of dollars. We just received disappointing reports from the National Assessment on Education Progress. So is your response to those disappointing reports, is your response to cut spending for K through 12 education? Or is your response to cut school lunches or child nutrition? Yesterday, the Ed and Workforce Committee reported a bill to override dietary guidelines for Americans, scientifically established guidelines for proper nutrition, and allow school lunches to be served in violation of those scientific guidelines. That bill was opposed by advocacy organizations concerned about child health and education. Hopefully, we don't have to cut child nutrition programs. College is already unaffordable. Are you going to cut programs like student aid or job training, which can transform lives? What do you want to cut? Or do you want to have cuts that threaten job safety with massive cuts to OSHA? Or maybe cuts in health care. But remember, when you cut health care and people go uninsured because of those cuts, they'll still get sick and go to the hospital, and guess who pays? Those costs are shifted to those with insurance. So cutting support for health care insurance will result in your insurance premiums going up. Or maybe you can cut Meals on Wheels provided by within the Older Americans Act. People depend on programs within the jurisdiction of the Committee on Education and Workforce. They certainly don't want them cut to fund tax cuts to the top 1% in corporations. And top 1%, that's people making over $700,000 a year. And by the way, when you cut corporate taxes, the benefit of those cuts go to the stockholders. And a lot of the stocks are held by people outside of the United States, so Americans aren't even getting the benefit of those tax cuts. Mr. Chairman, I would hope that we would protect the programs within the jurisdiction of education and workforce. These are vital programs that people depend on, and I would hope we would not cut them to fund these tax cuts for the wealthy. And I reserve the balance of my time.
I'd like to thank Mr. Scott for his comments. He reserves his time. Is there a member who would like to claim time in opposition?
I'd like to claim time in opposition, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Houchin is recognized for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The instruction for the Committee on Education and Workforce provides the committee with the necessary flexibility to craft policies within their jurisdiction. My friends on the other side of the aisle have amendments like these that are, they're hitting us for deficit increases, but they're offering amendments that are asking us to add even more to the deficit. We're looking for savings. Here's an example of something that I think we could rightfully cut out of this $330 billion, and that is Biden's student loan forgiveness scheme. It not only incentivized skyrocketing tuition, but it also pushed working class taxpayers, punished them, exacerbating the nation's debt and deficit crisis, in the process costing over $180 billion. The Department of Education is in dire need of fiscal responsibility. Not only that, the United States education system ranks near the bottom compared to other jurisdictions around the globe. Nothing in our budget resolution includes cuts and reforms or specific reductions within the Department of Education. It provides the Committee on Education and Workforce with the necessary flexibility to decide what policies are working and what are not. Reining in additional spending is a vital step toward restoring fiscal responsibility throughout the federal government. As a member of the Education and Workforce Committee, we will work with the administration to ensure state and local communities are getting what they need for education, but our fiscal house and the Department of Education is not in order, and we can all thank the Biden administration for the status of that department. I think this is a responsible step, what the chairman has marked up, and I support, I urge a no vote on this amendment and support what the instruction will be to the Department of Education, to the Committee on Education and Workforce. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield the remainder of my time to you.
I'd like to thank the gentleman for yielding. I'd just like to point out the comment was made in regards to the debt that was added by various presidents, and I agree. This has been an issue for both Republican and Democrat presidents, and we should all be concerned about the debt. We should all work on policies to change the fiscal trajectory. But I do want to point this out. During the Biden years, he added fully a quarter of the total debt held by the public. A quarter of the total debt held by the public was added during the Biden years. And with that, Ms. Halchin.
Will the gentleman yield, please, just for a second?
Well, it's Ms. Halchin's time, so Ms. Halchin, that's up to you.
Oh.
Would you yield?
I will yield.
Thank you kindly. I just wanted to place in the record the information on the accumulated debt over the several presidencies. And I think if you look at debt as a percent of GDP for the first time in the last 50 years, under Biden, it started to come down because the economy started to grow again. So I really do believe, sir, that we need to look at the revenue side over a period of years and what's happened. And together, the people who are willing to do it on both sides of the aisle, let's do something great for America for a change. Thank you.
Thank you. I would say, Mr. Chairman, and then I will close and I will yield back. We do not have a revenue problem in the United States. We have a spending problem, and House Republicans, with this budget resolution that we've crafted, are taking steps to try to get us on the right path.
Would the gentlewoman yield again?
Yes, I will.
I'd just like to reinforce that point, and I think you raised a valuable point. This is a good discussion. Revenue has, for about the last 50 years, been maintained at roughly 17% of GDP. And spending has, you look at the chart, has steadily increased to 26% of GDP from 50 years ago, maybe being about 16 or 18% maybe. So to Ms. Houchin's point, I think looking at the facts, we truly do have a spending problem that should be addressed.
Would the gentleman allow me to just respond very briefly? When I was born, there were 146 million people in this country. Today, there are over 300. We're edging toward 340 million. I would expect some of that spending to go up, but we need not to, behind closed doors, we ought to reach an agreement going forward. Maybe we could actually do it. Following on what Mike Carey said, maybe Ohio could help bring the sides together. Wouldn't that be great for the country? Thank you very much.
I yield the balance of my time.
Ms. Houchin yields, and Mr. Scott is recognized for 1 minute to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, when you say both sides, if you look at the cumulative effect of people increasing the deficit and decreasing the deficit, since the Kennedy administration, Democrats have reduced the deficit $4.5 trillion. Republicans regrettably have increased the deficit $6.5 trillion. And so if you're going to give credit to both sides, please give credit where credit is due. The Republicans have run up $6.5 trillion worth of deficit, and Democrats were only able to clean up $4.5 trillion of it. We tried, but it's heavy lifting. I asked, in terms of it's a spending or revenue, I asked your staff whether it's both revenue and spending, and they said that's simple arithmetic. It's obviously both. But in terms of this amendment, colleges are already too expensive. Students are having to incur massive student loans, and the student relief programs like the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, the programs that eliminate forgive if you've been defrauded, are very important. There's flexibility, obviously, in what you would cut, but you got to name it. It's $300 and some billion worth of cuts. It's got to land somewhere, and I would hope you would not apply those cuts to the programs in the jurisdiction of the Education and Workforce Committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The question is on agreeing to the amendment offered by Mr. Scott. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the